what are you going to do with it? What's the decision-making process that you're going to use once you have this information? Because that's really what guides the rest of the process. And so today's focus is going to be when the boss says, I need a better sales forecast. And so this could mean a lot of different things. It could mean, do you want actually sales or demand, or is there distribution? Is there, like, what do you actually want with this forecast? Oftentimes when the boss comes to me and says, I need a better sales forecast, they're really saying something like, we have this issue with some items staying in stock, not quite sure what's going on, maybe it's a pricing thing, but obviously if we had a 99% accurate forecast, we'd be good. So that kind of gives a nice starting point to be able to jumpstart the conversation. And so at this point we know it's something related to in-stocks. So talk with folks, figure out what's, let's say, the item flow. Where do in-stocks, out-of-stocks come from? And so this is a traditional, normal item flow. The manufacturer creates, Pampers, and like Rob was mentioning, I have a 2-month-old at home, so we buy lots and lots of diapers. So this is very relevant. There's a team dedicated to getting inventory from the manufacturer to the fulfillment center, and that's called replenishment. And there's another team dedicated to helping sell stuff, so getting it from the fulfillment center to the customer. And one of the main levers there is pricing. And so there's probably some issue going around in this domain that we need to look at. So to understand a little bit further, I just want to do a little bit of an overview of what is replenishment and what is pricing and how that might guide our decision-making process. So replenishment is trying to maintain the very lowest inventory levels that you have while meeting an expected customer service level. So this means, let's say I want to be in stock 99% of the time. How can I do that while holding the smallest amount of inventory? Over here you can see a traditional replenishment plot where the y-axis here is your inventory level and your x-axis is time. Initially you start with a decent amount of inventory that you slowly start to deplete. Once you get to a reorder level, you place an order that you hope to get arrive within a lead time. So by the time you've depleted through your inventory, you're now at your safety stock level. That inventory arrives, now you're back up to a good state, and this process repeats. If everything was like this, we'd be in stock all the time. Obviously, there's tons of uncertainty in just about every part of the process. You're unsure of your sales. There's variability in sales. There's variability in the lead time. Sometimes they'll ship it to you early, sometimes late. Sometimes they'll run out of stock, so it might be never. And then sometimes they might not send you a full quantity. You might order 100 units, but they actually send you 95 because there's some error in their packaging. Or sometimes they'll send extra. So there's definitely a lot of variability in this. On the bottom here is a met-demand inventory trade-off curve. So met-demand, it's effectively a weighted in-stock. As a company, you really want to be in stock on the items that matter, the items that sell, so you want to weight those more heavily than an item that doesn't sell. So the overall idea is the more inventory you have, the more likely you are to be in stock. But it costs you more money to hold that inventory. And so some of the challenges that we face is there's variable long lead times, uncertain forecasts, limited budgets, network flow constraints. Maybe a warehouse can only onboard or accept a certain amount of inventory on a given day. And so that needs to be taken into account as this. Holiday peaks are always interesting. And at Walmart, it's one of the cool problems is we have an e-commerce site and a store site. And so we can leverage each other's warehouses and inventory, but it does make it a much more complicated problem to try to solve. So this here's a brief overview of replenishment. On pricing, most people have some instinct of how pricing works. You set a price of an item. The lower the price, the more people buy. The higher the price, the less people buy. At Walmart, price is very core to how the company operates. Several of the fundamental principles are everyday low prices. The motto is save money, live better. So having a low price is very, very critical to how Walmart serves the cost-conscious customers. So some of the things that we need to look at is figuring out what is a fair price. How much will we sell? How long will our inventory last at that price? What's the impact of other items? If we lower the price of one kind of ketchup, well then that's going to impact the other kinds of ketchup. So when we're trying to make sure we meet the customer's demand, the customer's expectation of price, that we have a good sense of what's about to happen. So you can see here there's these two areas that forecasting is pretty important, that also involve price. But they're accomplishing something a little bit different, and they need something a little bit different from their forecasts. In replenishment, you're going to place an order based on a forecast of an assumed future price, or an assumed future price distribution. And so your order is a function of a forecast of a price. In pricing, you're trying to set the price based on predicted forecasts of possible prices. So in that case, the forecast has to be a function of price. It's a free variable in order for you to solve that problem. Another interesting thing is, obviously pricing happens after you have inventory. If you don't have any inventory, you have nothing to sell, and so you can't set a price on it. And so there is a difference between the price that you're going to replenish to and the price that it actually sells at. So now we have two different problems here, and they're actually going to require two different solutions. So I want to go through some of those decision-making processes and those trade-offs that we're going to make. So some of the possible forecast objectives for an item. So what could you forecast? You could forecast the demand of an item, the average demand. You could forecast the distribution of demand. For a company like Walmart, you could forecast the location. You could forecast sales by customer. You could forecast how much you're actually going to sell, which would be sales, versus how much you could sell if you were in stock, which is demand. You could forecast in-stock rates, what's your likelihood of being in stock, or the profit margin, what's the impact of profit for the company. If you want to, you could forecast social media posts. Each one of these is going to have a different use case and can be applied to different areas. So we need to make sure that we're attacking the right one when we're working on these replenishment and pricing problems. So our goal is to improve the customer metrics. And so in replenishment, we want to stay in stock. And before, we were just kind of saying you want to be in stock 99% of the time. What that means is in many ways, you don't care about the average forecast. You actually care about the upper percentiles of the distribution. What's the 98th, 99th percentile of the distribution? Because that's effectively what you're going to need to replenish to. So in this case, instead of focusing on the average sales, you need to focus on that distribution. And in particular, you care about the demand distribution. So how much will I sell if I am in stock? Because that's the goal, is to stay in stock. And so ideally, you're purchasing inventory for the future, in which case you're in stock in the future. For pricing, it's slightly different. In this case, you actually care much more about the average forecast, and you care about the sales and not the demand. If we're going to set the price for tomorrow, I care about what are we in stock tomorrow, not what we could sell if we were in stock tomorrow. So what that means is that for pricing, we want to forecast the sales. And in order to do that, we need to, in many ways, predict the future in-stock rates. So there's a secondary process that we have to take into account when we're looking at pricing. So just kind of in review there, you have demand versus sales, which depends on your projected in-stock rates. Because of that, a lot of forecasting methods can impute sales. In some cases that can help, in some cases that can actually hurt your objective. And another call out is that oftentimes a good mean forecast can actually generate a very bad 95th and 99th percentile. So you have to be careful about how you're using the models and that you're applying them to the correct situation. Another area that you're going to make some trade-offs is in the error metrics. Because there's many different ways of looking at the problem and deciding if it's a good forecast and a bad forecast. And here I just highlight three main areas of kinds of metrics. One is a traditional error metric, L2 norm, L1 norm. What's the difference between your forecast and the actual sales? Another is the bias, just on average, are you high or are you low? And then one here that oftentimes people don't look at is the volatility. So how much does the forecast change from one forecast period to the next? For every iteration of the forecast, how much does your projection change? And so these are three different metrics that we track very closely. And when we decide which forecast to use, we actually have to make some trade-offs, because some may be better in the usual error metric, but have more bias or low volatility. And so how do we decide which one to use? Just a couple extra points here. These are just, let's say, the bear metrics. You probably want to weight them and normalize them according to your use case. If you care more about your high-selling items, you'd weight it by that, or the profit impact, to make sure that you're looking at what actually matters. So in replenishment, you can kind of see we might have a slightly different situation than normal, where a high volatility actually causes huge overstocks. And so you can think of why would this happen. Is you order inventory when you think you're going to need it. If in one period your forecasts jump, at that moment in time you'll say, hey, I'm gonna need a lot of inventory. I'm going to go place your order. If the next time you forecast, the forecast drops considerably, well, you're not going to place an order. You're going to be hugely overstocked, and you really can't undo your order. And so you end up replenishing to the top of your forecasts as they fluctuate over time. So in this case, volatility can actually cause huge issues. And here we say volatility trumps accuracy and bias. Now, obviously, if there's a hugely, a volatility, you can forecast 0, no volatility, it's probably not very accurate. You don't want to go that far. You have to be reasonable in these trade-offs. In pricing, you're going to make a different set of trade-offs. Oftentimes, an overall bias doesn't really matter, because you're trying to optimize something that might, an overall bias might actually factor out of your entire problem. So if you're off by a factor of 2, you know what, it doesn't really matter, because maybe you think you're selling half as much, but the individual prices you set would actually still be the same. So again, bias is a little bit less relevant for the pricing aspect, in which case you want to actually really focus on the accuracy. Oftentimes, what we'll actually do is we'll use error metrics as, let's say, an initial test of the forecast, but then we actually use more thorough experimentation and simulation to see what would be the end customer impact. Because again, in replenishment, I don't really care about the forecast. I care how much are we in stock. And so we have to make sure that we make that leap from the forecast to the impact to the customer. And so we build out experimentation and simulation frameworks to help handle that. Another area where we are going to be doing things a little bit differently would be in timescales. So how far out do we need to forecast? In replenishment, you're ordering inventory. So it's roughly the amount of time it takes from the time you place the order to the time the inventory will arrive in the warehouse. So this can be anywhere from days to months. If there's co-located facilities, it can be a very short time period. If it's going to be something like apparel that's getting shipped in from overseas, it can be a several-month time period. So again, item by item, you might have different forecasting ranges that you're looking at. Pricing, again, there may be times that we want to act very, very quickly. If we think that the competitive landscape on a price has changed, we might want to react almost instantaneously. But for a company like Walmart, they also, in the stores, like to have very consistent pricing. So if you have a rollback, they like to keep the price consistent for several months. And so at that point, you actually care about a long-term forecast in determining what the impact of your price changes will be. Now, I'll just call out here is that when you're doing long-term forecasting, seasonality really comes into play. If you're doing short time scales, the seasonality is far less important, except for time periods during the holidays, like around Thanksgiving, Black Friday, where you're going to have huge spikes in sales. And so you need to make sure that you take that into account appropriately. Another area is computation speed, and so this is in many ways in line with the time scales. For replenishment, you're placing orders, you're not going to be placing orders with the manufacturers, every second of the day, right? So you have a decent amount of time to be able to generate your forecasts and make sure the process runs smoothly. In pricing, where we might want faster reaction times, you need to make sure that you're able to generate the forecasts much more quickly. And so in terms of the kinds of models we use and the computational resources necessary, you can make a trade-off between the two. So just a quick review of the trade-offs that we'd be making. In replenishment, your objective is going to be the demand distribution. You want low volatility, generally long time scales, and you're willing to spend a bit of computational time to generate those forecasts. On pricing, it's a different story, much more tuned to the mean forecast. You want to make sure it's highly accurate. You're looking at a short look-ahead window. And it also has to be computed very, very quickly. So these are the kinds of trade-offs that they're making here. And so if we go back to that original question that the boss had, we have these concerns about in-stocks, thinks pricing may be an issue. If it's in-stocks, it's probably replenishment that is the area that we want to look at. So I'm going to take some time to look at our forecasting process and some of the additional things that we have to look at when forecasting for replenishment and how we go about solving some of those problems. So one of the very interesting things at Walmart when generating forecasts is the size and the scale of the data that we have to work with. So Walmart stores has roughly 12,000 stores internationally. About half of those are in the US and half are outside the US. A store will typically have on the order of 200,000 items per store. Some will have more. They have very small convenience stores, and some that are larger, the supercenters. But we can say roughly 200,000 per store. So if you do this multiplication, this means that there are roughly 2 billion store item combinations that we need to forecast. And so these are forecasts that you have to generate, right? Because a store needs inventory. And so you can't get away with only doing part of it or whittling this down. So you legitimately need 2 billion forecasts to be generated on a very, very regular basis. When you want to start doing interesting things like looking at the halo effect or cannibalization, what's the impact of one item's sales on another? Now you're looking at 40 billion correlation terms. Again, quite huge. When you start looking at the e-commerce, so Walmart.com has, I think the last published was over 50 million unique items. And we're shipping these from warehouses. And so if you want to look at it at a per location basis, in the US there's something like 40,000 zip codes. At this point there'd be 2 trillion unique item zip codes that you'd have to forecast. When you want to do item-item combinations, 2 quadrillion item-item correlations. So these numbers get very large very, very quickly. And so you can see that computation of these forecasts becomes very, very important. So we're very sensitive to the timing aspect of it. There are some areas here where I'd say that 2 quadrillion item-item correlations are not something that we actually calculate. There are areas where you can make simplifying assumptions, so I'm not trying to pretend as though we are actually doing that. So now I'm just going to deep dive a little bit on, let's say, the Walmart.com items. So like I said, over 50 million items. Each of these items has between hundreds and thousands of attributes. It has a name, it has a description, it has a size, a color. You can imagine, say, a TV, all of the different pieces of information about a TV. How many HDMI cables or ports or things along those lines. And so there's a lot of extra semantic data that we have about these items. But also you can imagine for something like over 50 million items, you have a decent chunk of items that sell consistently. Like paper towels, you're going to sell a lot of those day in, day out. But you also have a very, very long tail. Like a particular kind of screw that's only used in one kind of manufacturing. You're not going to sell those very, very often. And so you have a huge spectrum of very, very high sellers and this long tail where there's almost no sales. And so you might need to handle these situations differently. Additionally, the actual sales can be sparse, and occasional stockouts can lead to, let's say, missing data. So there are items that are newly introduced, and so you only have a short time period. Some go out of stock for large periods of time because the manufacturer has some issues and then will come back in stock. And so one of the big things that we have to work with is dealing with missing data. So any model that can't handle missing data is generally something that we're not able to work with. So we focus more on those kinds of models. Then I say brand new items or items with new relatively short sales history. Again, time series analysis can be quite tricky to apply to these kinds of items. Here is just a plot of 20 related items, and you can kind of see their sales profile. This is over the course of a number of years, from 2009 to I think mid-2015. You can see that there's a general trend, there's a consistent spike. You can probably imagine that this is during the holidays. Some of these items have much better history than others. Some look very consistent, have a very consistent seasonality, others don't. And again, these are just the kinds of data series that we're required to generate forecasts for. So now that I told you about, let's say, our item data, you can see some of the new trade-offs kind of highlighted in bold. Replenishments, instead of being able to calculate in a slow fashion, that has to be fast. Pricing now has to be very, very fast. And so, relatively speaking, maybe replenishment you have a little bit more time, but you have to make sure that the computations are able to be computed in a reasonable amount of time, which is a very, very short time period for our use case. When we look at these items and how we're going to forecast them, we generally look and break them up according to their history. So how much history do they have? And let's say their sales profile. Some items, let's say, have very complete history. We've been selling them for 3-4 years. It's been in stock almost the entire time. Those items are, let's say, our favorite. Those are nice and easy. Generally, for our use case, you can pick almost any method that you want, and it will generate a good enough forecast because there's enough other errors in the system that they would outweigh any accuracy issues in your forecast. Let's say in replenishment, vendor lead times have a decent variability, and so if that variability is larger than your forecast error doesn't matter quite as much. We have a lot of items, like I mentioned before, that have a partial history. So maybe half of its life it's been in stock and half of its life it hasn't. Most, let's say, off-the-shelf methods fail very quickly with these kinds of items. This is really the hard part. So how do we handle missing data for seasonal items in scale? If items have no history, they're brand new, generally you can't use time series methods, machine learning, finding similar items is kind of the path that you're required to go down. The other area that we kind of look at is, say, the sales patterns. So are these consistent sellers? Are they high sellers? Do they have a, say, regular distribution that's analytical or close to analytical that you can then model against? Again, when you have this situation, many of the forecasting models are good enough. You kind of pick your favorite, whatever runs quickly, and you can usually go with that. We have a lot of intermittent sellers. These are ones that are tons of zeros, an occasional high sale. Again, usually most forecasting methods will handle these fairly reasonable, will give you a reasonable mean forecast. The distributions can be bad with those that the forecast methods will generate. So you just have to make sure that when it's being used properly by the downstream system, and they're aware that this is the kind of data that you're looking at. And if an item just has no sales, it's been in stock and zero sales, that's a nice easy one. That's our favorite. Forecast zero, and you move on. So I just want to spend a little bit of time now looking at the partial history case, because I think this is the most interesting one. And so kind of refresh, why do we have a partial history? Items were recently introduced, so you only have a short history. Items go out of stock for a variety of reasons. Sometimes data feeds are corrupt. Right? I mentioned, there's data from 12,000 stores and tons of systems. Occasionally these systems will have problems, and if a given store, you get a data feed that says it sold no bananas yesterday, something's wrong. Like, Walmart sells tons of bananas each and every day, so if a store says that there's none, you can probably assume that there was an issue with the data that you're getting. So you also have to make sure you're pre-processing and removing some of this data that you believe to be invalid. Since we have lots of items, what we can do is we can leverage those items that do have a good history, and in many ways apply that history to the items that are missing data. So we're going to share this information across items. So this introduces a new set of problems or questions. How should they share data? What kind of models are appropriate for sharing data? Which items should share data? Like I mentioned before, we have billions or trillions of forecasts that we need to generate. If we're doing correlations, you have billions to quadrillions of item sharing, which is probably quite impractical. And then what information should they be sharing? So these are some of the areas that we kind of look at. So if we look for modeling, now we're kind of getting into what do we actually need to model. Our requirements now are the models have to be fast. They have to include seasonality because we're doing long-term forecasting. We want low volatility. We need to allow for missing data, and we want to share information across items. So this is kind of the set of requirements that we're going to look at when we're deciding what path to go down. Is there one model that incorporates all of this, or are there several models that we need to break the problem apart and tackle? So our plan that we oftentimes do is we want to share information across items. So if we cluster or like items together, now it creates a smaller subset that we can then work with, which makes it so that way we can do it much faster. You can calculate the seasonal components separately offline. Ideally, seasonality does not change very frequently. So again, that doesn't have to be an inline streaming process. So if we calculate seasonality or components of seasonality that can be leveraged by other models, that becomes quite beneficial. For us, we end up really liking multivariate DLMs when we're doing our forecasting for demand. It handles missing data quite well, and since they're iterative, it definitely generates fast forecasts. Another thing that we oftentimes will look at doing differently is estimating the distribution function somewhat separately. Because again, we're looking at the long tail of that distribution. What's the 99th percentile? A lot of methods will that incorporate that into the forecast will show a lot of variability in that tail. And so we need to make sure that we have that under control. And so oftentimes we'll take the distribution that, let's say, the DLMs generate, and then do some processing on top of that to make sure that it's a much more stable, a stable distribution. So, what is multivariate DLM? It's effectively a traditional DLM where you allow correlations between items. Instead of just there being a temporal smoothing, there's a cross-sectional smoothing. You can have lots of free parameters in this. The more free parameters, generally the more variable your forecast will be, and the worse it'll be. So we'll usually try to kind of set some more specific parameters. So assume that all the items are correlated, correlated equally. It's definitely one of the ways that we make this a much more tractable problem. Again, models like DLM can be computed iteratively. So generally that means you're going to be generating a pretty fast forecast. So one of the keys to making this work is clustering the items appropriately. So if you have tens of millions of items or billions of item zip code combinations, how do you do this? If you put all these in a DLM, 1 billion entries, again, not quite practical. We actually haven't tried it. Maybe it works perfectly. Our guess is it's probably a bit of overkill. So now we're going to look at how do we decide which items are similar. Effectively, you have two different options. One is the sales data, and the other is the semantic information. What are the attributes about the item? And so, ideally, you're using both of these to say these are these are both TVs and TVs that have a similar sales profile. You want to be able to incorporate all of that information in. Usually when you're looking at the sales profile, you have a handful of choices of deciding what two sales profiles are the same and which ones are different. When we say items are the same, usually what we mean is, let's say, the actual shape is similar. If one item sells, 1 a week, and another sells 1,000 a week, but seasonally it looks similar. For us, that's really useful information. We can extract seasonality from that. And so now you have to use some sort of distance metric to look at the seasonality of items. So your first guess using some sort of Euclidean distance, it can work okay. What you end up with issues of, let's say, this scale. If one sells 1 a week, another sells 10,000 a week, it will never say that those two are similar just because the sheer scale are so different. It'll say, another item that sells 10,000 with a very different sales profile look like. So generally the Euclidean distance is something we need to kind of push to the side. When you look at the cosine angle between the items, this is much closer to, let's say, a seasonal relationship between these two items. Sometimes what we find here is that this becomes susceptible to outliers. There can be sudden spikes in sales, some valid, some not valid, some repeatable, some not repeatable, but it will oftentimes make items either look more or less similar than they probably truly are. And so that moves us to this variant correlation, where you effectively rank, you give a ranked vector based on the sales. And it'll say, week 2 had the highest sales, followed by week 4, then 3, then 1, then 5. And so this kind of says what's the relative ranking of the two sets of items. And we'll oftentimes use this to decide if the seasonality is similar or different. With our data, we've tested this a lot. This one seems to be the most reliable. If you're applying this to a new problem, obviously you should test and try these methods. There's definitely not a one-size-fits-all. Once you have these distance metrics, you effectively apply your favorite variant of k-means. There's a wide variety depending on the size of the data, some of the ways that you work with it, but that's generally what you go about doing. And then you also want to apply the semantic information, right? So you can imagine an item has no sales history. So what you do is you get all the items that do have sales history, you cluster them according to seasonality. There's some sort of semantic information that you have tied to that, and now you map these brand new items into those clusters. So here, say I'm calling this final thoughts is ensembling. So this is one of the things that I think oftentimes people forget that they almost never should. Ensembling of forecasts almost always give better forecasts with fewer outliers than any one. I don't know if you're familiar with, let's say there's a website called Kaggle that does data science competitions. They give you data, and within a couple weeks you're supposed to provide, let's say the best answer or solution to this. And you'd have people that are focused in individual areas will generate models, submit their answers. The winning one is almost always, their response is, I tried these 20 models, I then ensembled them, and that gave me the result. Here, saying this is one way of ensembling. Effectively, you fit your models, different parameters, use cross-validation, identify the best combination. Usually your forecasts are going to be correlated, so you want to ensure that the parameters are non-negative. Again, just kind of leads to more, generally more stable forecasts. Use lasso, non-negative least squares, bagging. We have a tendency to use non-negative least squares. This kind of seems to work well for our use cases. On top of that, once you've done this, you can do things like boosting, random forests. If you have a machine learning expert, you can add in these extra attributes towards the end. And again, this kind of helps make adjustments. With ensembling, let's say you can do something like this. Oftentimes we'll also find that if you just take all of your forecasts and just straight average them, that will also generate a better forecast than your initial, than any one of those initial forecasts. So this is just a little bit about, let's say, the ways that we do forecasting at Walmart, and some of the main areas and issues that we run into. I'd say number one is make sure that you ask questions that why are you forecasting, how is it going to be used. Talk to those domain experts, because they're going to actually provide insight into what is useful data, what is not useful data, what are the decision-making points that you have. Once you have that, look at the different trade-offs that you'd be willing to make. Don't just assume that you're going to use one error metric or another. Again, it has to be tied into the specific use case. Does it have to be a super simple model because it has to be computed very quickly? Do you have time to do long computations? This again tells you what area you should be focusing on. And then once you have that, obviously you have to find the model that's appropriate to you, and I kind of walk through some of the areas that we have at Walmart. So that's it for my talk today.